Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day, it's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. The groan of timber overhead, a sound alien to the house's usual nocturnal sighs, sent a jolt through my chest. I went utterly still, the plastic edge of the remote, a moment before an object of idle gnawing during my streaming marathon, now frozen inches from my lips. Just the old bones settling, surely, a flimsy shield against the sudden prickling cold that traced my spine. Houses like this, burdened with age, whispered and complained constantly. Yet, listening now, ears straining against the low thrum of the television, I caught it again. A furtive scrape, the unmistakable cadence of someone attempting stealth and failing. My parents were adrift on their weekend escape, not due back until the following dusk. This house, its familiar shadows and echoes, was meant to be mine alone. With a jab of a button, the TV fell silent, plunging the room into a deeper quiet, amplifying the frantic pulse hammering against my ribs. My gaze shot upwards. Then, a soft, definitive thump. Something small, dislodged, finding the floor. Is someone there? The question escaped, thin and reedy, a pathetic tremor betraying my fear. Silence answered, thick and absolute. Of course. What phantom courtesy did I expect? An intruder wouldn't RSVP to a terrified query. My phone felt slippery in my grip, fingers fumbling as I navigated to my father's contact. The call icon pulsed, but my thumb hovered. What if this was nothing? An elaborate prank staged by settling joists and an overtaxed imagination. The thought of interrupting their first real holiday in ages, only to confess fright over phantom footsteps, was mortifying. Another creak, sharper this time, originating from the landing just beyond the living room threshold. Closer. No. Better embarrassment than extinction. I pressed the call icon. The phone, cold against my ear, offered only the hollow chime of unanswered rings. 1, 2. Then my father's voice, buoyant and recorded, echoed like a mockery from their signal-less haven. A dead end. Disconnecting, my fingers flew, almost by instinct, to dial emergency services. Breath hitched, shallow and fast as the connection clicked, a calm voice slicing through the tension. But another sound, intimate and chilling, stole the air from my lungs. The distinct protesting whine of a hinge. The one on my parents' bedroom door, the one Dad perpetually intended to lubricate. 911, state your emergency. My throat closed. Words failed. My entire focus narrowed to the shadowed archway leading to the stairs, where darkness had just coalesced into a denser shape. Hello? My voice emerged, a fragile whisper. There's someone is inside my house. The silhouette shifted, detaching itself from the gloom, beginning its descent. The first step down. A sliver of light, cast from the still glowing television screen, caught a brief, cold shimmer. Metal held low in one hand. Your address, please? The dispatcher's composure felt worlds away, an anchor I couldn't quite reach. I recited the numbers and street name, a strange, detached steadiness overlaying the panic. Years spent watching younger cousins projecting authority I didn't feel had ingrained a peculiar calm under pressure. Officers are en route. Can you reach a secure location? Is there a way out? The figure occupied the midpoint of the staircase now, moving with deliberate slowness. Unseen, I huddled deeper into the corner cushions of the sofa. Escape was impossible. The front door lay directly past the foot of those stairs. No, I breathed into the receiver. They're between me and the door. I'm in the living room. All right, remain as calm as possible. If you can hide, do so now. Keep the line open. Hide. My eyes swept the familiar landscape of the room, now rendered alien and hostile. The coat closet by the door, too predictable. Beneath the sofa, impractical. The window, could I force it, break it? A floorboard groaned at the base of the stairs. My head snapped back. The intruder stood fully revealed in the dimness. Tall, clad in dark clothing, lean, and in his right hand, glinting dully, a substantial blade. Time warped, stretching thin. My own heartbeat became a deafening drum against my eardrums. The man's head began a slow, methodical scan of the room. Seconds ticked by, each one bringing discovery closer. Then, a flicker of memory, sharp and incongruous. Hide and seek, last summer, cousins scattered through the twilight garden. The absurdly cramped space that had secured my victory. Pure instinct propelled me. Sliding noiselessly from the sofa, phone clutched tight, I crossed the rug in 3 swift, silent strides. The entertainment console loomed. I wrenched open the lower cabinet, the one housing the dormant game systems. What is happening? The dispatcher's voice, tinny and distant. Hiding, I choked out, already folding myself into the cramped cavity. Gratitude, absurdly, for my slight frame. I eased the cabinet door almost shut, leaving only a hairline crack. Utter blackness enveloped me. Footsteps now, measured, crossing the living room floor. My lungs burned with the effort of suppressed breaths, terrified the slightest exhale would betray me. Police arrival is imminent, the dispatcher murmured, a lifeline of calm. Stay quiet. Don't move unless absolutely necessary. The steps paused, then resumed. Closer. I recoiled instinctively, pressing back against the unforgiving plastic edges of the console digging into my spine. My hand clamped over my mouth, stifling a gasp as something brushed against the entertainment unit itself. Agonizing moments stretched, filled only with the sounds of drawers being pulled open, their contents rustled, then shut. A systematic search. He would check the cabinets. It was inevitable. A siren's cry pierced the night, distant at first, then swelling rapidly, impossibly loud. The footsteps halted mid-stride. They're nearly there, the dispatcher assured. Hold on. The siren abruptly ceased. Right outside, a crackle, distorted voices through a radio, then a percussive bang on the front door that made me jump within my confined space. "Police! Open the door!" The footsteps in the room transformed into pounding urgency, the distinct crash of the back door being thrown open, followed immediately by the shattering cascade of glass. He was running, escaping through the kitchen. More shouts from outside, the heavy rhythm of pursuit fading into the night. Then, silence. I remained coiled in the darkness, every muscle screaming, unsure if the threat had truly passed. The dispatcher's voice startled me. "Officers are inside the residence. You can come out. Identify yourself immediately." Slowly, painfully, I pushed the cabinet door open, blinking against the sudden sweep of a flashlight beam as stiff limbs protested. I unfolded myself from the cabinet. "Police, show me your hands." I straightened, raising my hands. "I'm Alara. This is my house," I called. The intense beam lowered, revealing the stern, geared form of an officer. "Are you injured, Ilara?" I shook my head, a wave of dizziness washing over me as the adrenaline tide began to recede. No, I don't think so." The following hour dissolved into a surreal montage. More uniforms, clipped questions, the fine gray powder of fingerprint dust settling on familiar surfaces. I sat cocooned in a coarse blanket on the sofa, answering inquiries in a voice that felt borrowed. My parents arrived, faces etched with frantic worry, summoned by the frantic voicemails I'd left in what felt like another lifetime. It wasn't until much later, long after the flashing lights had retreated and my parents' anxious hovering had subsided into exhausted silence, that the true weight descended. Lying rigid in bed, every creak of the old house was magnified, each groan a potential footfall. Sleep felt like a distant country I couldn't reach. My phone vibrated. A text from Maya, my closest friend. "Saw the cars. You okay?" I started to type, to pour out the terror, but the words wouldn't form. How could I articulate the proximity of violence, the violation? "I'm okay," I finally sent back. "Talk tomorrow." A flimsy shield, easier than excavating the raw fear of those moments crammed in the dark, convinced each breath courted discovery. Setting the phone aside, my eyes drifted towards the entertainment console across the room. Even from this angle, I could see the edge of the cabinet door. So ordinary, mundane wood and hinges, yet it had been sanctuary. A shudder ran through me, involuntary, remembering the soft tread of those approaching feet, the cold promise of the blade. The terrifying cascade of what-ifs began. What if the memory hadn't surfaced? What if I'd been slower? What if he had checked that specific door? My mind became a frantic playground for hypotheticals, each scenario more chilling than the last. Logic insisted I was safe now. Patrols were increased. Dad was already scheduling a security system installation. But logic was a poor match for the primal fear still thrumming beneath my skin. Shadows pooled with menace. Unexpected sounds were daggers to the nerves. The simple fact that someone had moved through these rooms, this private space, felt like an invisible stain, a violation I didn't know how to cleanse. I picked up my phone again, thumb scrolling through contacts, craving the simple anchor of a familiar voice. But hovering over Maya's name, I faltered again. How could I burden her? How to explain this chasm that had opened, swallowing my sense of security whole? The phone went dark again, untouched. I burrowed deeper beneath the covers, eyes fixed on the unmoving bedroom door. Sleep remained elusive, my mind relentlessly replaying the night's terror on a closed loop. As the first tentative fingers of dawn painted the window edges gray, a silent resolve took root within me. This night would not own me. Fear would not dictate the geography of my life. Somehow, eventually, this house would feel like home again. But now, in the fragile quiet between darkness and light, I allowed the fear its space, acknowledged the stark helplessness, the terrifying role of sheer, dumb luck. The tears finally came, hot and silent, a release valve for the pressure that had been building since the first creak overhead. Tomorrow, strength would be required. There would be more questions, sympathetic glances from neighbors, the inevitable shadows lingering in dreams. But for now, in this solitary moment, I simply existed, felt, breathed, and with each inhalation, a mantra formed. I survived. I am here. Whatever followed, I would face it. As the rising sun finally cast a weak golden light across my room, a fragile filament of something akin to hope began to glow. The path back would be long, arduous, but I would walk it. One breath, one step, one day at a time, until home felt like home once more. That autumn night, when the ordinary peeled back to reveal the rot beneath, taught me that peril often festers in places utterly devoid of drama. A shift, like any other, bled into a desperate scramble for existence, irrevocably altering the trajectory of my life. My name is Elias. For 3 years, the echoing expanse of the Apex Holdings warehouse had been my nocturnal domain, night security. It wasn't glamorous, but the solitude suited me, paid the necessary dues, and offered quiet hours to wrestle words onto the pages of my nascent novel. Or so I believed, before the veil tore that Tuesday. October was breathing its last, unleashing a wind that keened around the building's corrugated edges, animating every shadow. I'd begun my watch, ensconced in the cramped security kiosk with the steaming thermos and my well-worn notebook. The initial hours drifted by in familiar silence. I walked the perimeter, tested locks, gazed down endless canyons formed by stacked crates and skeletal steel shelving, reaching for the shadowed rafters. The vastness usually felt calming, a metallic desert of quietude. But tonight, a dissonance hummed beneath the surface. Perhaps it was the roof groaning under the wind's assault, a metallic beast shifting in its sleep. Or perhaps the grim chapter I'd penned earlier had seeped from the page into the air, my own fiction breeding unease. Whatever the source, the sensation of being watched prickled at my neck. Around 2 a.m, it pierced the ambient hum, a fragile sound nearly swallowed by the warehouse's own respiration. But years spent listening to the night had honed my senses. This was alien. I silenced the flickering monitor in the kiosk, straining. Again, a thin metallic chime, followed by the guttural murmur of suppressed voices. They originated from the northern sector, a quadrant supposedly dormant and empty. My pulse quickened, a frantic drummer against my ribs. This wasn't the familiar scrabble of an errant raccoon or the sigh of settling inventory. This bore the unmistakable weight of human presence. My hand instinctively sought the radio, thumb hovering over the transmit button. But as I depressed it, only static answered. The northern sector, the warehouse's farthest reach, lay beyond the signal's grasp, shielded by the very labyrinth of steel I patrolled. A crossroads presented itself. Retreat to the kiosk, summon the authorities, and risk the intruders vanishing into the night. Or venture forth, gather proof, confront the unknown. Hindsight screams the prudence of the former, but in that charged instant, propelled by a surge of adrenaline and perhaps an echo of the fictional bravery I so often wrote about, I chose the latter. Flashlight clutched tight, I moved towards the sound's origin, my boots whispering on the smooth concrete. The voices gained clarity, coalescing into distinct, urgent fragments. Faster, damn it, the clock's ticking. One spat, a low rasp. This ordnance is heavy, another grumbled back. Closer now, heart hammering a rhythm I feared they could hear. I eased around a towering stack of pallets, and there they were, 5 figures swathed in dark attire, maneuvering crates onto a waiting forklift. One crate, I recognized it instantly, consigned just last week, labeled Precision Electronics, bound for a tech firm downtown. But as one man pried its lid open with a crowbar, revealing not circuits but the dull gleam of firearms nestled in foam, a glacial cold seeped into my veins. Not mere theft, something infinitely more sinister. A gasp, involuntary, escaped my lips. Or perhaps I shifted, a scuff of soul on grit. One of the figures snapped his head up. Our eyes locked across the intervening space. Time stretched, brittle and thin, then shattered. "Intruder!" the man roared, his hand darting to his hip. No time for thought, only instinct. I spun, launching myself back the way I came, the concrete unforgiven beneath my pounding feet. Shouts echoed behind me, the heavy thud of pursuit. I plunged into the maze of shelving, attempting to dissolve into the complex geometry, but they moved with unnerving familiarity. Each turn seemed anticipated, each potential escape route blocked by another dark shape. I found myself driven into a cul-de-sac of towering containers, footsteps closing in from the aisle's mouth. Trapped. Desperation clawed at me. My gaze swept the dead end, searching for a weapon, a shield, anything. Then I saw it. A narrow fissure between 2 colossal wooden crates, barely wide enough to admit a body. With a choked breath, I hurled myself into the gap, splintered wood tearing at my clothes and skin. I held my breath, compressing myself into the rough embrace of the wood as they stormed past, beams from their flashlights slicing through the dusty air. A fleeting moment of relief evaporated as a voice commanded, "Sweep every shadow, every gap." He didn't vanish. Discovery felt inevitable, a closing circle. I needed a lifeline. Trembling fingers fumbled for my phone. Predictably, no bars glowed on the screen. Futility washed over me. Then a spark. The emergency call function. Even without a network signal, it might connect. My digits shaking, I stabbed at the screen. 911. The agonizing seconds before connection felt like drowning slowly. 911. State your emergency." The voice, calm and professional, was the sweetest sound imaginable. In a frantic whisper, I relayed the nightmare. Apex Holdings warehouse. Armed men, smuggling weapons, hiding. They're searching. Hurry, please. "Sir, remain calm. Units are en route. Can you stay on the line?" Before words could form, a hand clamped around my ankle like a vice, yanking me violently from my refuge. My phone skittered across the floor, the operator's distant voice swallowed by the sudden proximity of danger. I was face to face with one of them, his eyes glacial slits above a dark mask. "Thought you could play hide and seek, night watchman?" he sneered. Rough hands hauled me upright, dragged me back towards the others. My arms were wrenched behind me, bound tightly. I was forced to my knees on the cold concrete. "What's the play?" one of them asked the apparent leader. He was tall, a jagged scar bisecting one cheek, his gaze unnervingly contemplative as he studied me. "Loose ends," he decreed, the words falling like stones. "Deal with him. Then we finish loading and clear out." My stomach plummeted. This was the end, then. A stupid, ignoble death in a dusty warehouse because curiosity had overridden caution. As one of the men leveled a handgun, I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact. Instead, a different sound sliced through the tension, growing rapidly louder, impossibly beautiful. Police sirens. The scene detonated into chaos. The men cursed, scattering like startled roaches, weapons clattering as they bolted for exits. Shouts of "Police! Freeze!" reverberated through the cavernous space, punctuated by the thunder of approaching boots. When I dared open my eyes, uniformed officers swarmed the area. One was already kneeling beside me, slicing through my bonds, his voice urgent. "Are you injured? Are you okay?" The following hours dissolved into a surreal haze of flashing lights, clipped questions, and formal statements. Most of the crew were apprehended, though a couple had melted into the pre-dawn darkness. The sheer scale of the arms smuggling operation they uncovered, thriving unseen for months beneath my very feet, was staggering. As dawn painted long, pale stripes through the high warehouse windows, a detective approached me. "Mr. Vance," he said, his expression serious. "Your quick thinking tonight. It likely prevented unimaginable harm. These weapons." He gestured vaguely. "Let's just say their intended recipients wouldn't have used them for target practice." I managed a numb nod, the night's terror still clinging like frost. "Just doing my job," I murmured, the words feeling inadequate. A faint smile touched the detective's lips. "You did considerably more. That took guts. Ever thought about law enforcement?" A weak, incredulous laugh escaped me. "Think I've had my fill of excitement for a while, thanks." Yet, watching the methodical police work unfold, something fundamental shifted within me. The adrenaline hangover was receding, replaced by an unfamiliar resonance, a sense of consequence I'd only ever explored in fiction. My quiet nights of solitary patrols and scribbled prose felt suddenly hollow. I had brushed against genuine peril, witnessed true courage in action, and the boundary between observer and participant had blurred. In the ensuing weeks, Detective Moreau's question echoed. Perhaps I possessed something more than the ability to imagine heroism. Perhaps I could enact it. 6 months later, I stood on the precipice of a new life, enrolled in the police academy. The path wasn't easy. The training was grueling. But whenever doubt surfaced, the memory of that warehouse night surged back. The suffocating fear, the unexpected wellspring of resolve. Now, cruising city streets under the cloak of night, my world transformed. I occasionally cast my thoughts back to Apex Holdings, to how one unremarkable evening became the pivot upon which my entire existence turned. And I understand. The most profound transformations, like the deepest dangers, often lie dormant in the utterly mundane, waiting only for the courage to investigate the discordant sound in the darkness and the wisdom to recognize when the only sane response is to call for help. The farm was a poisoned inheritance, a tract of land scored deep with the furrows of bitter memory. My father's thunderous rage, my mother's echoing quietude, the relentless cycle of chores that had devoured my youth. Yet, his death a month prior had tethered me back to this place I'd fled. Obligations, sharp and cold as the autumn air, demanded my presence. A mortgage bleeding red ink, 3 decades of accumulated life needing dissection and disposal. Silas, the reluctant heir, had come home. Trouble began brewing on the 3rd evening. Ensconced on the decaying back porch, nursing a beer to the cicada's thrumming pulse, a flicker at the woodland border snagged my attention. 50 yards distant, where cultivated land surrendered to tangled forest, something pallid undulated in the deepening twilight. A deer, my mind first supplied, common trespassers on these acres. But, narrowing my eyes against the gloom, a knot cinched tight within my chest. The silhouette defied nature's geometry. Too erect, too slender. Humanoid, perhaps, yet distorted, hunched slightly, its whiteness stark against the encroaching umbra of the trees. It possessed an unnerving stillness. My fingers scrambled for the heavy flashlight, a necessary tool against the house's temperamental wiring. By the time its beam sliced the darkness, the space was empty. Only trees stood sentinel, cloaked in shadow. A figment, I reasoned, born of fatigue and the deceptive dusk. Still, the house felt safer. Bolts slid home, latches clicked into place, a ritual of security before I retreated to the stale air of my childhood bedroom. The following night found me vigilant. Same worn chair, same porch, but the flashlight rested heavy in my lap, my gaze sweeping the tree line with methodical repetition. Just as the sun bled below the horizon, it reappeared. The identical bleached form, frozen between the gnarled arms of 2 ancient oaks. This time, the flashlight's response was immediate. I thumbed the switch, casting a bright spear of light. Vacancy. Utter emptiness where the apparition had stood mere heartbeats before. A tremor ran through my hand as I raked the beam across the dense foliage. The woods seemed to absorb the illumination beyond 30 feet, a suffocating curtain. Gone, if it ever truly was. Daylight hours were spent wrestling with logic, attempting to dismiss the haunting as a byproduct of stress, sleep deprivation in a room thick with ghosts of the past, an overtaxed imagination painting specters onto the familiar canvas of the farm. Yet, a profound disquiet had taken root, a cold certainty coiled in my gut. That evening, I abandoned the porch, opting instead for the kitchen window, keeping the interior lights extinguished for a clearer view of the descending night. It materialized with the sunset's final gasp, punctual as dread. The pale entity stood at the edge of the woods, but closer now, 40 yards, maybe less. The dwindling light revealed more unsettling details, limbs elongated, disproportionate, a neck canted at an angle that spoke of breakage. It swayed, a subtle, rhythmic motion like a reed in a phantom breeze, though the night air hung utterly still. My hands, slick with sweat, fumbled again with the flashlight. Its beam lanced the twilight, and again the figure dissolved the instant light touched its station. I held the beam steady, my breath ragged, pulse hammering against my ribs. Silence stretched. Minutes crawled. Then movement registered peripherally. It stood again, 10 feet to the left of my focus. I swung the light, vanished. But this time I glimpsed its retreat. Not a run, not a walk, but a bizarre sideways scuttle, crab-like and utterly alien. Primal fear, cold and sharp, pierced through me. I yanked the blind shut, retreating to the couch, bathing the room in harsh electric light, where I remained huddled until dawn, listening to the house settle around me. Every creak a potential footfall. Morning brought a call to the local constabulary. Deputy Thorne arrived, his manner professional but tinged with the weary skepticism of rural law enforcement. He walked the property line, his boots leaving prints where none other could be found, noting the undisturbed undergrowth. He tested the locks, suggested the installation of motion-activated floodlights, and offered the dispatch number. Likely teenagers pulling a prank, he surmised, his gaze sweeping the impassive trees. Or coyotes, can look awful peculiar in the half-light. But his reassurances felt hollow. Teenagers didn't move with such disjointed grace. Coyotes didn't stand upright, nor did they evaporate under a beam of light. That afternoon was dedicated to fortification. Motion sensors were mounted, their plastic eyes staring blankly towards the woods. 2 brighter, heavier flashlights joined the first, their bellies filled with fresh batteries. Practical measures, I told myself. Reasonable precautions against... what? My hands shook as I tightened the screws, my gaze flicking constantly towards the silent, watchful trees. Nightfall. I was prepared. Floodlights guarded the front and back of the house, poised to banish shadows. 3 flashlights lay within easy reach. I sat in the darkened living room, peering through a sliver in the curtains. It manifested as the last vestiges of daylight drained from the sky, punctual as a nightmare. 30 yards now, closer. The proximity, combined perhaps with some ambient lunar glow, sharpened its horrific details. The pallor wasn't merely white, but the grayish, waxy sheen of decay. Arms, grotesquely long, dangled past its knees, terminating in spindly, elongated fingers. The head lolled at an impossible cant, almost sideways upon a twisted stem of neck. I lunged for the switch controlling the new floodlights. Click, click, nothing. The darkness outside remained absolute. Panic flared, hot and quick. I snatched the nearest flashlight, aiming it towards the window. A feeble click, a dying glimmer, then darkness. dead. The fresh batteries inexplicably drained. Outside, the figure took a step. Its locomotion was a stuttering horror, jerky and unnatural, like a poorly handled marionette. I scrabbled for the second flashlight. This one flared to life. I thrust its beam through the glass. As ever, the entity winked out of existence. I kept the light fixed, sweeping it frantically across the lawn. A faint scratching sound erupted from the window pane directly behind me. I spun, my heart seizing. Empty glass reflected the beam. Turning back, a fleeting image burned onto my retina. A face, bone white, pressed against the pane mere inches from where my own had been moments before. Eyes like vacant pits, immense and black. A mouth, lipless, stretched into a horrifying rictus, ear to ear. A nanosecond's glimpse before it dissolved. Terror propelled me upwards, stumbling into my old bedroom. The door slammed and locked behind me. I collapsed in the farthest corner, flashlight beam pinned to the door, listening. Sounds crept through the old house, faint, skittering within the walls, impossibly soft footfalls ascending the stairs, a delicate, persistent scraping against my bedroom door. Sunrise eventually bled through the cracks, painting lines of light beneath the door. With its arrival, the sounds ceased. An hour passed in brittle silence before courage returned, enough to unlatch the lock. The house stood empty, undisturbed. No marks marred the windows, no prints scarred the dew-kissed lawn. That morning, bags were packed with frantic haste. A call to a realtor followed, instructions delivered in a clipped, strained voice. List it, sell it, as is. Let the bank and the inheritor of junk contend with the estate. Another night within those walls was unthinkable. As I tossed my luggage into the car, an inexplicable compulsion made me look back, towards the woods. There, stark against the green canvas of daylight, between two familiar oaks, it stood. One impossibly long arm lifted, a gesture that might have been a wave, the ghastly grin splitting its face. I didn't hesitate. The engine roared, tires spitting gravel. That was 2 weeks ago. Now, anonymity is sought in a cramped city apartment, the farm a receding nightmare. Yet forgetting proves elusive. Each night, shadows in the corners seem deeper, more substantial. Sometimes, gazing from my third-floor window at dusk, I perceive movement between the opposing buildings. A flicker of pallor, unnaturally tall. Something with elongated limbs and a head skewed impossibly. Something that feels closer. A flashlight resides on my nightstand, a familiar talisman, but its comfort wanes. I suspect the light no longer repels. Perhaps it merely blinds me to the approach. Last night, a scratching sound at the window pane. High up, nothing visible when I looked. This morning, however, long, thin score marks marred the glass, 3 stories above the street, and the flashlight, inert, batteries dead. Its nature remains unknown, its desires inscrutable, but its presence is undeniable. It followed. Sooner or later, the light will fail entirely. One impending night, I will look up, and that ravaged face will be pressed against my window, the lipless mouth stretched wide in its soul-freezing grin. And this time, escape routes have dwindled to none. I commit this to paper, a desperate testament. If these words find you, if you glimpse something pale lurking at the periphery, resist the urge to investigate. Forget the flashlights, the locks, flee, run without looking back. Though a chill uncertainty grows within me, even flight may offer no true sanctuary. Once it fixates, it is relentless. Closer, always closer, night by inexorable night, until the darkness claims its due. The scratching begins again. Sunset paints the sky. My flashlight is cold and heavy, useless. It's here. Fear wasn't on the itinerary for my rustic retreat, yet it found me on the second night. Out there, on a ribbon of road swallowed by darkness, I encountered an anomaly, a luminous riddle that still sends a tremor through me whenever memory dredges it up. I hadn't courted trouble. A simple gulp of night air was all I sought. But the glow I witnessed on that desolate track clings to my thoughts, unsettling me still. My escape from the city's clamor led me down a serpentine track, barely wide enough for one vehicle, hemmed in by dense stands of trees that clawed at the sky. Beyond a certain point, civilization surrendered, leaving no lamps to pierce the encroaching twilight. At the terminus, by a simple gate, stood Corbin, proprietor of this sequestered haven. His ancient pickup idled, a loyal beast against the backdrop of fading day. I trailed him in my own car, the tires spitting gravel as I navigated onto a designated patch of earth beside the main house. The sun, still holding court around 3, permitted a tour. The ranch house hunkered low, a single-story affair crowned by a covered porch. Inside, Corbin introduced Alara, his wife, whose welcome was warm, urging me toward domestic ease. The dwelling was modest, a living room furnished with a couch and television, a functional kitchen, a pair of bedrooms. Mine, tucked at the hall's end, offered Spartan comfort. A bed, a modest dresser, a lone wooden chair sentinel in the corner. A thin curtain veiled the window. Parting it revealed the wood's ragged edge, a mere 50 yards distant, a wall of looming green. I unpacked, donned a fresh shirt, and rejoined my hosts. Corbin proposed a walkabout. We circuited the grounds. A diminutive barn leaned slightly to the left, flanked by animal pens and a coop radiating the faint, earthy tang of its inhabitants. Everything bore the patina of age, weathered yet resolute. The land sloped gently behind the house, descending to a meandering creek, beyond which lay more timber and fenced territories Corbin attributed to a neighbor. The air, a curious blend of manure, cut grass, and moist soil, hung thick, an oddly grounding perfume confirming my distance from urban sprawl. That first evening unfolded over a simple meal. Charred meat, beans, garden vegetables, shared on the porch as dusk bled into night. Conversation ambled through unremarkable territory. They cautioned about the profound darkness that consumed the property post-sunset, advising a torch for any nocturnal excursions. Neighbors were scarce, the nearest hamlet a 20-minute drive away. With no plans to venture out, I mentally shelved the advice. Night descended like a velvet shroud, amplifying the chirr of crickets and the furtive rustlings from unseen creatures in the undergrowth. A breeze stirred, whispering through the high branches. I lingered in the living room's solitary pool of lamplight with a book until 10, Corbin and Alara having retired earlier. The house settled into a profound quietude. My room enveloped me, the silence pressed in, punctuated only by my own respiration and that faint, internal hum one perceives when the world goes utterly still. Sleep eventually claimed me. Morning brought a modest breakfast, followed by an invitation from Corbin to try a fishing spot by the creek. Rods in hand, bait secured, we descended to the water under a strengthening sun that demanded hats and sensible shoes. Our efforts yielded little. A pair of fingerlings returned to their element. By noon, we were back for lunch prepared by Alara. Rice, greens, remnants of the prior night's feast. Afterward, Corbin departed for town errands, leaving Alara to her kitchen duties. Seized by a need to explore further, I ambled solo along a dirt track winding past the barn. It looped through tall, whispering grasses before depositing me near the chicken coop, revealing a couple of derelict sheds slumbering in neglect, one with its door hanging askew like a broken limb. The afternoon drifted uneventfully. Corbin returned near sundown, weariness etched on his face, proposing a drive to town for libations. We found ourselves in a small, dimly lit bar populated by a handful of locals whose chatter seemed entirely ordinary. No hint of local phantoms or roadside specters arose. The return journey near 9 o'clock underscored the isolation. Our headlights carved a tunnel through absolute blackness. Beyond the beams lay an impenetrable void. Back at the ranch, after brief good nights, I retreated to my room, a strange restlessness prickling beneath my skin. Perhaps the city dweller in me chafed against the profound stillness, leaving my thoughts to race in the vacuum. Around 11, the four walls felt too close. A need for air propelled me outdoors. I palmed a small torch from a kitchen drawer and slipped through the door, easing it shut. The porch bulb cast a feeble, apologetic glow. The night air carried scents of damp turf and cooling earth. I drifted towards the front gate, past stacked flower pots huddled against the house wall. 20 yards brought me to the barrier, a simple construction of iron bars secured by a chain. Beyond it lay the dirt road, dissolving into shadow. Clouds veiled the moon, rendering the landscape profoundly dark. Leaning against the cool metal, I took a slow breath, listening to the nocturnal susurrus. A faint rustle in the brush behind me, likely some small mammal, and then I saw it. A pinpoint of luminescence materialized far down the road. It resembled a solitary headlamp, perhaps a motorbike or something smaller, a focused, circular beam advancing along the straight, deserted track. My ears strained for the accompanying thrum of an engine, the crunch of tires on gravel. Silence. Only the ceaseless drone of insects and the sigh of wind in the trees answered. My hand tightened on the iron gate. The light drew nearer, unhurried, gliding at a deliberate pace. I extinguished my own torch, plunging myself into near-total darkness to better observe. The approaching beam held unnervingly steady, devoid of the jouncing gait expected on such an uneven surface. Crucially, there was no discernible form enveloping it, no silhouette of rider or vehicle, just the naked light. Then, abruptly, as if a switch were thrown, it winked out, vanished. The road offered no turn-offs, no dips where it might have descended. It was simply there, then not. I remained rooted, anticipating footsteps, the appearance of someone carrying a lamp. The road remained an empty, Stygian corridor. A frantic pulse hammered against my ribs. A clammy dew broke out on my skin. My mind scrambled for logical footing, finding none. After a minute or two suspended in tense expectation, I reignited my torch, sweeping its beam fruitlessly up and down the lane, probing the impenetrable tree line. Nothing. My retreat to the house felt leaden, punctuated by glances back into the oppressive dark. Inside, I secured the lock, doused the torch, and stood listening in the blackness, the frantic thrumming in my chest the only sound. Eventually, I crept to my room. Sleep was a skittish creature that night, easily startled by the memory of the phantom light. Over breakfast the following morning, I recounted the night's peculiar encounter. Corbin listened intently, his expression grave but lacking outright surprise. He confessed they, too, had occasionally observed an anomalous drifting light on that stretch of road. Elara nodded confirmation, adding she'd glimpsed it herself a month prior, though from a greater distance. Corbin admitted to once investigating with a shotgun, suspecting trespassers, but found only empty darkness. The source remained stubbornly elusive. Whispers among the few neighbors spoke of a traveling lantern that dissolved upon approach. Explanations were non-existent. A cold current traced its way down my spine. Had they ever heard footfalls, seen a figure associated with the glow? Corbin shook his head, only the disembodied luminescence. Elara, visibly unsettled, offered tentative theories. Stray reflections, distant headlights refracted, while simultaneously acknowledging the layout of the land, the profound isolation rendered such explanations improbable. There were no convenient hills, no reflective surfaces, no adjacent roads close enough. Throughout that day, normalcy felt like a costume poorly worn. I assisted Corbin with mending fences, hammered reluctant nails, scattered feed for the animals, yet the phantom light loomed large in my thoughts. I resolved to watch for it again that night, a decision Corbin met with hesitant understanding. The phenomenon unnerved him, he admitted. Standing vigil in the dark for something inexplicable held little appeal. I promised to report any recurrence. Dinner was an early affair. By 9, Corbin and Elara had retreated for the night. I prowled the living room, a captive of anticipation, glancing at my watch until, near 10, the waiting became unbearable. Donning a light jacket against the evening's cooler breath, torch in hand, I ventured out once more. A faint breeze raised gooseflesh on my arms. Back at the gate, I rested my hand on the cold iron, peering into the absolute blackness cloaking the road. Again, I killed my light and waited, letting my vision adapt. Stars pricked the vast canvas overhead, but the moon remained hidden. The wind sowed through the trees, carrying the scent of damp leaves and earth. A nervous flutter persisted in my chest. Minutes stretched taut. Then, there, a nascent glimmer, barely perceptible, blooming in the distance. It intensified, resolving into that familiar, solitary orb of light. And the silence, absolute, profound. My mouth turned to dust. My palms grew slick against the metal gate. It advanced with the same measured, spectral glide. I held my ground, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Closer it came, a pure, circular incandescence, offering no clue to its vessel or bearer. And then, precisely as before, poof, extinguished. Darkness reclaimed the road. I stared into the void where it had been, straining for any sign, movement, a lingering shape, the crunch of a footstep. Nothing. A frustrated cry lodged in my throat, Snapping my torch back on, its beam sliced into the night, illuminating 10 feet of dusty track before yielding to the impenetrable gloom. No tracks marred the surface, no evidence of passage. Impulsively, I rattled the chain, swung the gate open, and stepped onto the road itself, gravel crunching underfoot. I advanced a few yards toward the point of disappearance, every nerve ending alight with apprehension, scanning the dense roadside thickets. Only the empty night, the whispering wind, and my own jittery presence occupied the space. A sudden, visceral shiver coursed through me. This was far enough. Retreating quickly, I secured the gate behind me and hastened back to the perceived safety of the house. I roused Corbin and Alara, relaying the second visitation. Corbin's face tightened with visible anxiety. He muttered about corroborating tales from neighbors, enough to lend credence to something genuinely strange. Alara, clutching a robe around herself, simply stared at the floorboards, whispering her incomprehension. We convened briefly in the living room, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic tick of an old wall clock, a mundane counterpoint to the night's extraordinary event. No theories offered solace or sense. Eventually, we dispersed back to our beds. True relaxation eluded me for the remainder of my visit. A morbid curiosity warred with the urge to flee. I endured 2 more nights. On the final evening, the light performed its silent passage once more. The approach, the steady glide, the abrupt vanishing. Packing my bags felt like closing a chapter I hadn't fully read. As I prepared to depart, Corbin extracted a promise. If I ever unearthed an explanation for the luminous enigma, I would share it. A promise readily given, though utterly baseless, as I possessed not a single clue. A brief chat with a neighboring farmer on my way out yielded little more. He'd seen the light himself numerous times, dismissing it as some prankster with a powerful torch, albeit one he'd never managed to intercept. It caused no harm, he shrugged, just rattled those unfamiliar with its appearances. Driving away from the ranch, I watched the dusty track recede in my mirror. Bathed in morning sunlight, it looked deceptively benign. Yet, a persistent knot tightened in my gut, a knot that remains to this day. My certainty is absolute. It was no mere headlamp. Its movement possessed an unnatural silence, its disappearance a baffling cleanness. Reason insists on a mundane explanation, some elaborate hoax, a local eccentric with a lantern traversing that lonely path. But without evidence, only the unsettling memory persists. That solitary, silent beam gliding through the darkness, swallowed whole by the night. And that memory is more than enough to keep a tremor of unease alive within me. The cerulean immensity, my lifelong refuge, warped that sun-scorched afternoon into a boundless cage, stalked by an invisible hunger just beyond sight. Months I'd dreamt of this solitary voyage through the Florida Keys, a pilgrimage aboard my own small vessel. As Alara Vance, marine biologist, the ocean's rhythms were my native tongue, yet this journey held a different cadence. It promised liberation, a chance to dissolve into the endless azure and perhaps retrieve some fractured piece of myself. Serenity, maybe, or clarity, lost in the wreckage of a dissolved love and the evaporating ink of a denied research grant. I felt untethered. I craved this immersion. Dawn broke perfectly, the air a crisp, saline elixir pregnant with possibility. My modest motorboat, christened the Turn, offered little in aesthetics but possessed a heart of steadfast reliability. Provisions for a day's deep exploration of the archipelago's hidden pockets were stowed. The initial hours unfolded in pure, unadulterated bliss. I discovered a sequestered cove, slipping beneath the surface to drift amongst kaleidoscopic corals, shoals of silver flashing past my limbs like quicksilver thoughts. Later, sprawled on deck, the sun's warmth soaking into my skin, I lost myself in the worn pages of a novel. It was early afternoon when the anomaly registered, a speck against the horizon's shimmer, almost consumed by the solar glare reflecting off the water. Insignificant, I thought. The keys hummed with nautical life. Others were surely chasing the same flawless weather. But time stretched, and a disquiet grew. Whichever bearing I chose, that distant vessel mirrored my movements, maintaining a constant interval, near enough to be a presence, too far to yield its secrets. Paranoia, I chided myself. Just another wanderer tracing a similar path through the blue labyrinth. Yet the unease coiled deeper in my gut, a cold knot tightening. My gaze kept flicking astern, tension seizing the muscles across my shoulders. I resolved to test this shadow. I altered course sharply, aiming for a knot of islets I knew to be largely untouched, their mangrove fringes dense, the channels between them narrow, labyrinthine passages unforgiving to the uninitiated. For a spell, sheltered by the twisting waterways and the overhang of verdant chaos, I tasted relief, believing I had slipped the phantom pursuit. But, emerging from the archipelago's far side, my hope withered. There it lingered, the same indistinct craft holding its station, undeniably tethered to my wake. Fear, authentic and glacial, began to seep in. This was no random encounter. Occupants unknown were deliberately tracking me, had been for hours. Why? The question spawned monstrous possibilities: sea bandits, smugglers dealing in illicit cargo, or some horror less definable. The keys, for all their sun-drenched allure, harbored shadows. People vanished out here, their vessels discovered adrift, eerily empty. Help! The imperative screamed in my mind. I snatched for my phone, a pit forming in my stomach as the screen displayed "no service." Predictable. I'd ventured too far, embraced remoteness too completely. I stood utterly alone. Tremors ran through my hands as they clenched the wheel. My mind raced, sifting through dwindling options. Attempting to outrun them was futile. The Turn was no match for their evident power. Reaching the nearest populated island meant hours of travel, and the sun already bled towards the western rim of the world. While I wrestled with charts, squinting, desperately trying to conjure a strategy, peripheral movement snagged my attention. The other boat. It was altering its vector, angling directly, inexorably towards me. My breath hitched. The waiting game, whatever its cruel purpose, was over. Panic detonated. Instinct overriding thought, I wrenched the helm hard, spinning the Turn in a frantic gyre. Spray sheeted over the sides as I jammed the throttle forward, demanding every ounce of speed from the small engine. Destination unknown, escape the only imperative. I tore across the open water, eyes darting between the unfolding seascape ahead and the relentless pursuer shrinking the distance behind. Their larger engine devoured the gap, a growling inevitability. Sweat slicked my back, cold despite the ocean spray. In desperation, I veered towards a reef system I knew lay just beneath the surface, a treacherous gamble. One miscalculation, one encounter with submerged coral, and I'd ripped the hull open. But the turn was smaller, nimbler. Perhaps this underwater maze could be my salvation. The boat bucked and slammed as we entered the shallows, the keel scraping ominously against unseen stone. I gritted my teeth, knuckles white on a wheel, navigating by memory and raw instinct. Behind me, a distinct shout carried across the water, followed by the abrupt silence of a killed engine. Had they grounded? I didn't pause to confirm. I pushed onward, deeper into the reef's embrace, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, mirroring the slap of waves against fiberglass. Only when the sounds of pursuit had utterly vanished did I dare ease the throttle, sucking in ragged breaths as the adrenaline tide began its slow retreat. A new predicament crystallized. In my panicked flight, all sense of direction had dissolved. The sun plunged, igniting the sky in fiery oranges and bruised purples. Darkness would soon descend, and I was adrift in perilous waters with no clear path to safety. I cut the engine, letting the turn drift in the sudden, profound quiet, broken only by the water's gentle murmur against the hull and the lonely cry of distant gulls. I fumbled for my charts, but the fading light rendered them nearly useless. A sharp crack echoed across the water, making me flinch violently. A gunshot? No, the unmistakable, sickening crunch of a hull striking coral. They were still out here, still hunting. Fear transmuted into resolve, sharp and defiant. I would not become another statistic, another whispered tale of the sea's mysteries. I was a scientist. I understood these waters. I could survive this. Drawing a steadying breath, I forced logic upon the chaos. The reef. It had to be the elbow. I recognized the telltale pattern of coral heads breaching the surface. If so, salvation lay northwest. Islamorada, civilization, help. With hands that still shook, I restarted the engine, the sound deafening in the encroaching twilight. I pointed the bow northwestward and began to creep forward, slow, cautious. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into the shape of a boat. Every wave crest whispered of an approaching engine. The journey felt interminable. I strained my eyes against the deepening gloom, searching for navigational markers, perpetually braced for the jarring impact of collision. Then, gradually, agonizingly, pinpricks of light materialized on the horizon. Islamorada, safety. Near in the harbor, flashing blue lights pulsed in the darkness. For one heart-stopping instant, I thought it was them, that they'd somehow outmaneuvered me. But no. Coast Guard. Someone must have reported erratic vessel behavior. They were clearly alert. Never had I felt such profound relief at the prospect of being boarded. As I spilled my frantic narrative to the dubious-faced officers, the last vestiges of my strength evaporated. They searched, but found no trace of the phantom vessel, no corroboration for my breathless, fragmented account. I saw the assessment in their eyes: dehydration, sunstroke, perhaps intoxication. But I knew the cold certainty of being prey. the visceral terror of isolation in the vast, indifferent ocean. They escorted me back to the marina, the Tern appearing small and wounded beside their imposing cutter. Stepping onto the dock, onto solid, unmoving ground for what felt like the first time in an eternity, my legs gave way. Strong hands intercepted my fall, guiding me down onto the weathered planks. Someone offered water. I drank deeply, suddenly aware of a raging thirst. The world around me swam in a haze of official procedure. Harbor police taking statements, curious onlookers drawn by the minor drama. But my thoughts remained adrift, circling that pursuing boat. Who were they? What motive drove their silent hunt? Would they surface again? No answers ever emerged. The official record attributed the incident to the perils of solo sailing exacerbated by environmental stressors, a cautionary anecdote. Yet, I carried the truth within me. The ocean, my sanctuary, had unveiled its capacity for menace. The immensity I once found liberating now felt threatening, concealing unseen dangers beneath its shimmering skin. It was a long time before I ventured onto the water again, and never alone. Always, my eyes scanned the horizon, instinctively searching for that familiar, dreaded silhouette. Because I know, somewhere in the blue expanse, they might still be watching, waiting, hunting. The sea, my first love, my passion, became an indelible reminder. Even within profound beauty, darkness coils, ever present, just beneath the surface. The scent of salt, the gull's cry, they transport me back, instantly, to that small boat, that vast loneliness, predators circling, ever closer. Dusk was already thickening the air when I, Elias Thorne, found myself before the skeletal frame of the house. A bruised, indifferent sky pressed down, and the atmosphere itself felt heavy, saturated with an odor of stagnant water and time's slow rot. My commission was precise. Inventory the scattered remnants of horological obsession, gears, faces, casings, whatever lay within. The front door yielded with a protracted groan, a sound like old bones settling. Inside, I deposited my valise onto a diminutive, spindle-legged table adrift in the hallway's gloom, releasing a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This place, I'd been informed, was the neglected inheritance of some forgotten relation to a deceased collector, sealed away from the world for years uncounted. A flick of the switch summoned light, but it was an anemic, stuttering pulse from a weary bulb. Along the walls, obscured by a fine shroud of dust, hung antique portraits, their painted eyes seeming to follow my tentative movements. I ventured deeper, mapping the geography of neglect. The corridor spilled into a drawing room suffocated by ponderous drapes. An ancient rug swallowed the floorboards beneath, and against one wall stood a sentinel, a grandfather clock, utterly mute, its hands frozen eternally at 13 minutes past 4. Drawn near, I confirmed the paralysis of both hour and minute indicators. Behind the glass, the pendulum hung inert, a brass teardrop caught mid-fall. A gentle tap on the crystalline barrier elicited no response, no tremor of life. With a shrug that felt inadequate, I turned towards the staircase, its treads complaining loudly beneath my weight. A distinct chill permeated the upper landing, raising goose flesh along my arms despite the day's lingering humidity. The summit of the stairs presented a narrow passage punctuated by 3 doors. One revealed a bedchamber steeped in the acrid scent of mothballs. Another guarded a bathroom where a fractured mirror offered splintered reflections. The final door, recessed at the corridor's terminus, promised the attic. Pulling it open released a cascade of cool, musty air and unveiled a flight of raw wooden steps ascending into darkness. My torch beam carved through the gloom, illuminating spectral cobwebs festooning the rafters. Upon reaching the attic proper, my light swept across rows of cardboard sarcophagi perched on tables, shadowed wooden crates huddled in corners, and, suspended centrally, a single naked bulb. A tug on the pull cord coaxed it into a flickering existence, eventually steadying into a frail amber luminescence. My immediate focus, however, was snared by a shelf spanning the attic's considerable length, arrayed like some bizarre museum exhibit with clocks. They marched in procession from diminutive pocket watches, nestled like metallic beetles, to grand mantel clocks boasting ornate visages. I moved closer, eyes straining against the inadequate light. 2, perhaps 3 dozen timepieces stared back, and every single one, every last disparate mechanism, proclaimed the identical hour, 4:13. A knot tightened deep within my chest, a cold premonition. No logic accounted for this uniformity. Some lacked protective glass, others bore the bloom of rust, hands missing entirely. Yet, where hands remained visible, they pointed with unwavering insistence to that precise, inexplicable moment. I lifted one, a small travel clock with a tarnished brass handle. The metal felt unnaturally cold against my skin. Its second hand was snapped off, yet the hour and minute indicators remained rigidly locked. Twisting the setting knob yielded nothing. They refused to yield. Locating a somewhat larger specimen with a rear-winding keyhole, I attempted to infuse it with tension. Resistance met my efforts. A stubborn refusal echoed on the clock face, forever fixed at 4:13. Resigned, I began the inventory, meticulously noting type, estimated provenance, maker's marks, and condition in my ledger. An hour dissolved into this painstaking process, cataloging 15 clocks before the ache in my spine demanded respite. Setting the notebook aside, I selected a substantial mantel clock. Its glazed front panel swung open, granting access to the hands. Reaching inside, I nudged the minute hand with cautious fingertips. It yielded, grudgingly, inching towards 4:17. Then, abruptly, it fought back. My fingers slipped as the hand recoiled with an audible snap, spinning backward with startling force to settle once more at 4:13. The clock nearly tumbled from my grasp, the sudden violence sending a jolt through me. My heart hammered against my ribs, my palms filmed with clammy sweat. Carefully replacing the object on its shelf, I retreated several paces. The attic air seemed to have dropped several degrees. A gust of wind rattled the grimy panes of the small window at the far end, accompanied by the dry rustle of leaves scraping against the roof shingles. The stagnant air now carried a sharper tang of aged wood and pervasive mildew. Just a mechanical anomaly, I reasoned, a bizarre coincidence of breakage across multiple devices. Extinguishing the feeble attic light, I descended, securing the door firmly behind me. In the drawing room, I established a workspace at an old escritoire, supplementing the house's weak illumination with my own portable lamp. My wristwatch displayed 7:15 p.m. A hollow pang in my stomach reminded me of neglected needs. I unearthed a sandwich and water from my bag. Silence reigned, punctuated only by the sporadic creaks and groans of the old structure settling around me. My gaze kept drifting towards the imposing grandfather clock. It demanded closer scrutiny. Rising, I approached it again, easing open the tall glass door. The pendulum within was dull, tarnished. The winding key lay inside the case. I inserted it, turned. Gears clicked, protesting, but the hands remained steadfastly at 4:13. The hour hand, tested gently, was equally immovable. A sigh escaped me as I secured the case once more. After my meager meal, weariness from the journey and the unsettling discoveries pressed down. Locating the designated bedroom on the second floor, I unpacked minimally, setting my travel alarm for the stark hour of 6 a.m. The bed offered firm, unyielding support. The linens felt vaguely stale, the pillows unforgivingly flat. Closing my eyes, my thoughts churned with the day's strange inventory. Sleep eventually claimed me, though it was a restless, shallow affair. Sometime in the deep cradle of night, a strident ringing shattered the silence, echoing sharply down the hallway. My first thought was my alarm, prematurely triggered, but the sound was too insistent, too loud. Then silence fell again. Heart pounding, I sat bolt upright, gulping air. The room was a pit of darkness, the door frame a barely discernible rectangle. Another ring commenced, this time a dissonant jangle, multiple chimes layering discordantly. Throwing back the covers, I fumbled for my phone, its screen casting a ghostly light as I crept towards the hallway. The house held its breath. Only the soft pad of my own feet on the floorboards broke the stillness. Reaching the stairwell's precipice, I peered down. Faint moonlight filtered through the tall front windows, painting the drawing room in shades of deep indigo and shadow. Suddenly, a chorus erupted, the resonant chime of the grandfather clock, interwoven with the higher, tinny bells of smaller mechanisms. The entire house vibrated with the overlapping peals. It persisted for perhaps 5 seconds, then ceased as abruptly as it began, leaving a ringing void. My chest felt constricted, breathing shallow. Wiping beads of sweat from my brow, I found my mouth dessert dry. This shouldn't be happening, I whispered inwardly. They aren't wound. They're broken. I scrambled downstairs, hand slapping blindly for the hallway light switch. It clicked, and the bulb flickered reluctantly to life. In the drawing room, my eyes shot to the grandfather clock. Still 4:13. Pressing my ear to its wooden flank, I heard nothing. No tick, no whir, no sign of mechanical life. Then my gaze fell upon the mantelpiece above the cold hearth. Several small clocks, ones I distinctly remembered cataloging in the attic, now sat there in a neat, unnerving row. My stomach plummeted. I had no memory of bringing them down. Each face, stark in the lamplight, showed 4:13. A chill traced its way up my spine. Retreating into the hallway, trying to anchor myself in reality, I inhaled the pervasive mustiness, the scent of air long undisturbed. A powerful urge surged to flee, to abandon the commission. But the contract bound me, and surely, I insisted to myself, there existed a rational explanation. My phone confirmed the time. 3:11 a.m. Daylight felt impossibly distant. Retreating to the bedroom seemed the only option. I returned upstairs, locked the door, a futile gesture, perhaps, and began to pace. Each footfall on the ancient wood echoed the house's profound emptiness. My muscles were rigid, my breathing tight. Eventually, I lay down again, fully clothed, mind racing, replaying the clocks, the chimes, their inexplicable migration. Morning found me hollow-eyed and exhausted, uncertain if true sleep had occurred at all. After a hurried bite from my provisions, I made straight for the attic, the closed door somehow ominous. Ascending the steps, I activated the light and immediately noticed more vacancies on the long shelf. Clocks were missing, undoubtedly the ones now gracing the drawing room mantel. My notebook lay undisturbed, the crates as remained as I'd left them. Turning my attention to one of the larger crates, I pried it open. Inside lay a jumble of watch components, spare gears, disembodied clock faces. I began sorting, noting, forcing myself to concentrate, though my eyes kept straying to the remaining clocks on the shelves, their hands still pointing defiantly to 4:13. From a box on the floor, I extracted a large, old wooden wall clock, its glass cover clouded with grime. It exuded an aroma of dust and desiccated varnish. Setting it carefully on a small table, I located the winding aperture on its face. Selecting a key from my toolkit, I inserted it and began to turn. The internal gears engaged with a series of satisfying clicks. Tension built within the mechanism. To my astonishment, the second hand stirred, creeping with agonizing slowness past the 12. A flicker of triumph, of relief, ignited within me. Then, abruptly, it halted. The minute hand snapped back, returning instantly to 4:13. My eyes widened. A wave of icy cold washed through me, prickling my scalp. Stumbling back a step, I scrubbed a hand over my face, attempting to regulate my ragged breathing. The remainder of the morning was dedicated to the grim task of cataloging the contents of the crates. After a functional lunch, I compelled myself to revisit the clocks on the shelves, attempting adjustment once more. Each effort proved futile. Hands either refused to move or sprang back to their ordained position with that unnerving snap. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and I found myself repeatedly wiping my damp palms on my trousers. A new anxiety took hold, a reluctance to look away, a paranoid fear they might shift or rearrange themselves the moment my attention lapsed. But they remained static, perpetual monuments to 4:13. That evening, I resolved to maintain a vigil in the drawing room. Setting up my folding camp chair near the fireplace, I extinguished the main lights, leaving only the pool of illumination from my portable lamp. The house sank into a profound quiet, broken only by an intermittent, almost subliminal ticking. It wasn't the steady beat of a healthy clock, but something more erratic, a furtive scraping or tapping whose source remained elusive. My nerves stretched taut, my legs twitching with restless energy. Around 9 o'clock, the first sound came, a single, sharp clang, like a hammer striking resonant metal. I leaped from the chair, heart seizing. Immediately, it was followed by the familiar, chaotic symphony of overlapping chimes, echoing dully off the oppressive walls. I held my breath, fingers trembling, chest tight. The chimes seemed slower this time, heavier, as if struggling through water. Then, the abrupt cessation, plunging the room back into absolute silence. Driven by a frantic energy, I illuminated every light I could find, moving from room to room in a desperate survey. A small clock sat on the kitchen counter, an item certainly not there previously. Its hands, 4:13. Another materialized inside a glass-fronted cabinet in the seldom-used dining room, the same time. My throat felt raw, constricted. The urge to bolt was nearly overwhelming, yet I clung to the flimsy hope that morning light would bring clarity, or at least courage. There must be an explanation, I chanted internally, even as my mind failed to conjure one. Old, interconnected mechanisms, prank triggers, but the migration. How? Sleep was impossible. I remained downstairs until midnight ticked past on my own reliable watch, eyes fixed on the staircase, ears straining against the silence. My gaze repeatedly snagged on the grandfather clock, its face impassive at 4:13. Eventually, eyelids heavy with fatigue, I conceded defeat and decided to retreat upstairs. Pausing at the foot of the staircase, I heard it. A faint, dry scratching, like metal dragged across wood, emanating from the floor above. Swallowing hard against the lump in my throat, I ascended, each tread groaning its protest. Upon reaching the second-floor landing, the sound ceased. I stood motionless, staring at the closed attic door, waiting. Silence. I retreated to my room, locked the door again, and sank onto the edge of the bed. My heart refused to slow its frantic rhythm. The unnerving certainty that I was being observed, measured by something unseen within these walls, settled deep in my bones. Lying back, still fully dressed, I stared at the ceiling, the image of countless hands locked at 4:13 replaying behind my eyes, punctuated by the memory of those discordant chimes. Was I losing my grasp on reality? I glanced at my phone, watching the seconds tick by with reassuring normality. Exhaustion finally dragged me under, into a shallow, dreamless state. I surfaced once, around 3 a.m., listening intently for the chimes. The house remained still. After several tense minutes, eyes fixed on the door, I drifted off again. Dawn arrived, bringing with it a stiff neck and a dull, persistent headache. After splashing cold water on my face in the bathroom with its fractured mirror, I resolved to make one final, rapid sweep through the attic and house, gather my notes, and terminate this unsettling commission. Climbing to the attic, I intended to begin packing the inventoried clocks. The moment I entered, I saw that even more timepieces had vanished from the shelves. The few remaining clung stubbornly to 4:13. Empty boxes lay strewn about, disturbed by forces unknown. Taking out my phone, I documented the depleted shelves with quick snapshots, then began gathering the clocks I could manage into a large crate. Sealing it, I started dragging the heavy container towards the attic steps. A loud clang resonated behind me. I spun around, heart hammering, to see a small metal clock lying face up on the floorboards, evidently having fallen from a shelf. Picking it up, I confirmed its allegiance. 4:13. Breathing heavily, sweat trickling down my back, I placed the fallen clock atop the crate and hastened down the narrow stairs. Reaching the second-floor hallway, I was met by a sudden, inexplicable blast of frigid air that nearly made me lose my grip on the crate. My knees felt weak, but I manhandled the container into the relative safety of the bedroom. My plan solidified. Pack my suitcase, leave immediately, deal with the contractual fallout later. Descending to retrieve another empty box, I found the drawing room light flickering erratically. At least 5 clocks now occupied the floor space around the coffee table, arranged in a loose semicircle. All showed 4:13. They hadn't been there last night. Ignoring them with forced determination, I collected the box and retreated upstairs. As I moved, a series of faint, rapid ticks seemed to pursue me from below. I quickened my pace, the pulse in my ears drowning out other sounds. Deposited in the box beside the crate in the bedroom, I noticed the door had swung shut behind me, though I had no recollection of closing it. My phone vibrated, a calendar reminder, checkout required by the following day. The screen displayed the current, mundane time, nearly 10:15 a.m. Enough. I would gather my essentials and escape. The oppressive tension in my chest felt unbearable. Moving with frantic efficiency, I collected my notes, stuffed clothing haphazardly into my valise, and zipped it shut, constantly glancing over my shoulder, half expecting new clocks to manifest in the periphery. Descending the main staircase one last time, another clang echoed through the house. It felt undeniably sourced from the grandfather clock. Drawn, despite myself, I approached it, pressed my hand flat against the wooden case, then yanked open the glass door. Nothing stirred within. The pendulum hung motionless. The face remained fixed. 4:13. Slamming the door shut with more force than intended, I hurried to the front entrance. The door scraped open, releasing me into the welcome, ordinary daylight. My heart still raced, but the fresh air felt like a balm. Carrying my valise to the car, I threw it into the trunk, then slid into the driver's seat, acutely aware of the lingering stiffness in my neck and shoulders. The engine turned over, a comforting, mechanical sound. I pulled away from the curb, away from that house of arrested time. Yet, even as the distance grew, the sensation persisted, a feeling of being watched by countless static eyes, all locked on that impossible hour. My gaze flickered compulsively to the rearview mirror, anticipating some pursuit, some impossible reflection. The road behind remained empty, blessedly normal. All that remained was the highway ahead, the thrum of the engine, and the indelible memory of overlapping chimes echoing not just in the house, but now, it seemed, within the chambers of my own mind. The mystery of 4:13, of how and why, remained unsolved. A cold knot of dread I knew I would carry long after leaving that place behind, a place I vowed, with every fiber of my being, never to revisit. Rain, cold and insistent, kissed my upturned face as twilight bled through the skeletal canopy overhead, stretching shadows into grotesque figures across the forest floor. My stride, already urgent, lengthened, boots grinding fallen leaves into damp pulp. Then a flicker, improbable through the dense weave of branches. Lamplight, perhaps? No, something fainter, a pale suggestion of refuge. A structure stood silhouetted against the gloom. A cabin. Salvation, my weary mind whispered. A lie, as it turned out. The threshold Ilara was about to cross guarded not sanctuary, but the genesis of a night steeped in primal fear. Hiking was my solace, the wilderness my cathedral. Confidence, however, had become arrogance. This trail, serpentine and unforgiving, had humbled me. I'd misread the contours, misjudged the clock ticking relentlessly towards nightfall. Now, leagues from the planned sanctuary of my camp, bereft of shelter and with provisions meager, the encroaching dark and plummeting mercury felt like a personal indictment. The heavens opened then, a deluge drumming against my inadequate jacket, leeching warmth from my core. A tremor, born of cold and apprehension, snaked down my spine. Yet the cabin beckoned, a siren call in the tempest. It stood weathered, ancient, its timbers bleached to the color of bone beneath a perpetually weeping sky. No plume curled from its stone chimney, no welcoming glow emanated from its vacant window eyes. Abandoned, surely. A relic left by some long-departed woodsman. Each step onto the Protestant porch groaned under my weight, leaving muddy sigils on the warped planks. A rap on the solid door, ritual more than expectation. Silence answered. Tentatively, I grasped the cold metal handle. It yielded with unnerving ease. "Anyone home?" My voice, thin and reedy, vanished into the waiting stillness. Only the rain's insistent drumming on the roof offered reply. My flashlight carved a stark cone through the interior gloom, revealing a Spartan existence frozen in time. A compact cooking area huddled in one corner, a lonely pot resting on the cold belly of a wood stove. Against the far wall, a narrow bed lay neatly draped with a quilt whose colors had surrendered to age. An almost invisible shroud of dust lay upon everything, testifying to months, perhaps years, of solitude. A wave of profound relief broke over me, an empty haven. Here I could weather the storm's fury and greet the dawn renewed. I shed my sodden pack and jacket, draping them near the door like discarded skins. Hunger gnawed. A compressed bar of nuts and dried fruit offered scant comfort as I consumed it standing. My restless gaze cataloged the cabin's meager possessions. A dusty shelf sagged under the weight of brittle paperbacks and faded trail maps. Then, perched on the mantel above the stove's cold maw, a framed photograph, its subject veiled by grime. Compelled, I lifted it, polishing the glass with my sleeve. A man materialized from the past, posed before this exact structure. His face, etched by time and elements, belonged to someone perhaps 60 years lived, framed by a formidable gray beard. But his eyes, they possessed an unnerving directness, seeming to pierce the veil of time and dust to fix squarely upon me. An involuntary shiver traced the path of the earlier chill. I replaced the photograph carefully, dismissing the prickle of disquiet as mere fatigue and shadow play. Outside, the storm raged unabated. Resigned to a night within these walls, I located a cache of dry kindling beside the stove. Soon, flames licked the seasoned wood, casting flickering amber light that danced across the rough-hewn walls, chasing the damp chill from my weary limbs. The hearth's embrace was hypnotic, the crackle and pop a soothing counterpoint to the rain's tattoo. Exhaustion, deep and bone-heavy, began its insidious creep. Retrieving the faded quilt from the bed, I cocooned myself near the fire's welcome heat. Yet, even swaddled in warmth, a dissonant chord of unease hummed beneath the surface. A persistent, irrational certainty settled upon me. I was not alone. Eyes, unseen, observed. Sleep claimed me, brief and troubled, shattered by a noise alien to the storm's symphony. Not wind, not rain. A distinct pressure, the complaint of old wood under weight, a footfall on the porch. My pulse leaped, a frantic drum against my ribs. "Hello?" The word was a fragile thing in the charged air. Silence, then more creaks, stealthy, circling the cabin's perimeter. Someone, something, prowled the darkness just beyond the walls. I surged upright, the quilt pooling at my feet. My gaze swept the small space, desperate for defense. It snagged on a cast-iron skillet hanging near the stove, its heft a small anchor in the rising tide of fear. I seized it, The furtive movements outside ceased. Only the frantic thrumming in my ears and the relentless rain broke the sudden, heavy quiet. Then, a sharp, peremptory rap echoed from the door. I flinched violently. "Who is it?" I managed, striving for a firmness my voice betrayed. "Open this door," rasped a low, gravelly voice, thick with implicit threat. "My place. You got no business here." Panic flared. His cabin? Why the skulking approach? The lack of a key. This felt viscerally wrong. "My apologies," I called, retreating further into the room. "I believed it deserted. I'll gather my things and leave immediately." A guttural laugh met my placation. "Bit late for departures, ain't it? Settled right in, you have. Let me in now. Time I showed you proper welcome." The door handle jiggled, then began to rattle with savage force. Clutching the skillet, handle slick in my sweating palm, I backed away. "Leave," I yelled. "I've alerted the park rangers. They're en route." A flimsy lie. The dead zone for reception was absolute out here, a truth we likely both understood. Yet, perhaps the bluff. A pregnant pause. Then, with a calamitous crack of splintering timber, the door imploded inwards. Silhouetted against the stormy night stood the man from the photograph. Silas, his name now screamed in my mind, yet rendered infinitely more terrifying in flesh and blood. His eyes, feral and alight with mad intensity, fixed on mine. A grotesque parody of a smile stretched his lips. "Right then," he snarled, advancing into the cabin's fire-lit space. "Let the entertainment commence." Instinct usurped thought. Adrenaline surged. With a guttural cry born of sheer terror, I swung the heavy skillet in a desperate arc. It met his skull with a hideous, wet crack. He folded, collapsing like a marionette whose strings were cut. I stood gasping, the iron still vibrating in my hand, staring down at his inert form. God, did I kill him? Nausea roiled, but then a low groan escaped his lips. His limbs twitched. Seconds. That's all I had. The skillet clanged to the floor. I snatched my damp jacket, a useless shield, and launched myself through the ravaged doorway into the maelstrom outside. Ink-black wilderness swallowed me whole. Rain fell not in drops but in suffocating curtains. Blindly, I plunged forward, unseen branches lashing my face like whips. Behind, erupting from the cabin, came enraged bellows. Silas was up. Silas was coming. Terror lent wings to my feet. I ran as if the hounds of hell snapped at my heels, lungs searing, heart threatening to burst. A treacherous root snagged my ankle. I pitched forward, tasting mud and desperation. Scrabbling upright, plastered in grime, disorientation swamped me. Direction dissolved into a singular imperative. Move. His pursuing shouts sliced through the storm, closer now. I bolted from the barely discernible trail, crashing headlong into dense, thorny undergrowth. Briars ripped at my clothes, my skin, the pain a distant echo beneath the roaring fear. Abruptly, the forest floor vanished beneath me. A vertiginous fall, tumbling end over end down a precipitous slope, culminated in a bone-jarring impact that stole my breath. I lay stunned, gasping like a landed fish. Through the ringing in my ears, a new sound asserted itself. The frantic rush of water. A river. Hope, fragile but fierce, flickered. If I could reach it, lose him in its embrace. Painfully, I hauled myself upright, staggering towards the sound. The oppressive trees gradually receded, revealing the churning, ink-dark surface of a river swollen and enraged by the storm. Just as I reached the bank, the crashing pursuit sounded perilously close behind me through the underbrush. Silas. No time for hesitation. I threw myself into the frigid, violent current. It seized me instantly, a powerful, indifferent force dragging me downstream. I fought wildly, choking on spray, battling to keep my head above the turbulent water. From the bank I'd just vacated, a furious bellow tore through the rain. Through the stinging spray, I saw him, Silas, a silhouette of impotent fury at the water's edge, fist raised against the storm and my escape. He did not enter the torrent. The river, my unlikely savior, was sweeping me away. How long I remained in that icy grip, I cannot say. Time lost all meaning. Eventually, battered and hypothermic, I clawed my way onto the far bank, collapsing in shivering exhaustion, but breathing, alive, as the first pearlescent fingers of dawn tentatively probed the bruised sky. The most beautiful music I had ever heard reached my ears. The rhythmic thwump, thwump, thwump of rotor blades. Deliverance descended from the clearing heavens. The subsequent days unfolded in a disorienting haze of sterile hospital corridors and clipped police inquiries. They located the cabin, violated and empty. Of Silas, no sign remained, vanished as if into the very forest miasma that birthed him. Only the dusty photograph on the mantelpiece bore silent witness. Now, when storms lash against my window panes, the memory sometimes surfaces unbidden. The cabin's deceptive warmth, the feral gleam in Silas's eyes, the suffocating darkness. Is he still haunting those woods, a predator awaiting the next unsuspecting soul? The thought is a cold hand gripping my heart. Yet I endured. I stared into the abyss of absolute terror and emerged, scarred but whole. Life's lesser fears seem muted now, its challenges manageable, measured against the crucible of that night. Something fractured within me then, yes, but perhaps something stronger grew in its place. I am warier, certainly, forever scanning the tree line as dusk descends, but I'm also more acutely aware of the preciousness of light, of safety, of breath itself. I still seek the solace of the wild paths, but never again do I court the encroaching shadows. Some truths need only be etched into the soul once. A whisper of metal on metal, the lock tumbler yielding with a faint snick that echoed disproportionately in the cavernous entryway, and every muscle in my body seized. Stillness descended, absolute and terrifying. I shouldn't be here, lingering in the opulent quiet of this house entrusted to my professional care. But the subsequent shuffle of footsteps drifting from the kitchen confirmed the unthinkable, a bloom of ice spreading through my veins. I was not alone. Someone else had chosen this twilight hour for an unscheduled arrival, and a chilling certainty gripped me. They weren't admiring the architecture. My name is Ilara. For half a decade, I've navigated the currents of real estate, selling sanctuaries, brokering thresholds. It's a world of measured steps, calculated negotiations, the delicate art of matching dreamers to their domestic havens. Yet, on this particular autumn evening, as day bled into dusk and long shadows stretched like grasping fingers across the immaculate grounds, the familiar rhythm fractured. I found myself ensnared in a wakened nightmare. far removed from floor plans and closing costs. It began innocently, a standard showing. The Hawthorne place was undeniably desirable, a grand dame of Victorian design, replete with modern comforts, nestled within 5 acres of whispering woodland. Securing the listing felt like a coup, the potential commission a glittering prospect. The prospective buyers, the Ashworths, a polished couple hinting at late middle age, had radiated genuine enthusiasm during our afternoon walkthrough. Their inquiries were astute, their appreciation for the intricate crown molding palpable. They'd even debated the perfect placement for a concert grand in the voluminous living space. As our tour concluded, Mrs. Ashworth recalled with a soft gasp a forgotten scarf left behind in the master suite. "Oh, please don't trouble yourself," I'd assured her, professional warmth coding my voice. "I'll retrieve it during my final check later. You can collect it from my office tomorrow." Their gratitude was effusive as they departed. Locking the heavy oak door behind them, I planned my return for the evening. A quick retrieval, a final sweep to extinguish lights. It was a small courtesy, a standard practice for such prestigious properties, ensuring immaculate presentation for the next potential viewing. Now, rooted to the parquet floor of the entryway, that dedication felt like a fatal misstep. The forgotten silk scarf lay draped over a console table nearby, discovered moments after I'd let myself back in. But before I could snatch it and retreat, the distinct sound of another key turning in the very lock I'd just secured had frozen me mid-motion. My initial thought, the owners returning unannounced, dissolved as low, unfamiliar voices mingled with the distinct scrape of heavy objects being shifted. This was something else entirely, something illicit. Heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, I edged toward the kitchen. Through the sliver of the partially open door, 2 figures materialized, men I'd never seen before. Clad in dark, indistinct clothing, one hefted an object that glinted dully under the ambient light, a crowbar. "Sweep upstairs," the taller one commanded, his voice a low rasp. "I'll start down here. Find the safe. Has to be around." Burglars. The word screamed silently in my mind. I was an accidental witness to a home invasion. Panic flared as I frantically tried to recall activating the security system upon my return. No, I hadn't. The errand was meant to be brief, in and out. Retreating slowly, soundlessly, my thoughts raced. The front door was impossible. They'd hear the deadbolt instantly. Hiding, calling the authorities, that was the only viable path. My hand instinctively sought my phone, finding only empty pocket lining. A cold dread washed over me. The kitchen counter. I'd set it down there upon entering, distracted by the scarf. Footsteps pounded on the grand staircase, the second man ascending. Urgency propelled me. I slipped into the adjacent study, easing the heavy door closed until it clicked softly into the frame. Darkness enveloped me, punctuated only by the weak luminescence of distant streetlights filtering through plush velvet curtains. My eyes darted wildly, seeking sanctuary. Behind the imposing mahogany desk, 2 exposed. Amongst the towering, leather-bound spines on the bookshelves, impractical. And then, almost swallowed by the shadows beside a large potted fern, I saw it. A small, unassuming door. The dumbwaiter. an archaic charm that had captivated the Ashworths earlier. With scarcely a breath, I folded myself into the narrow confines, pulling the door shut just as the study door swung open. Through the thin wooden slats, the beam of a flashlight sliced through the darkness, playing over furniture and walls. "Clear in here," a voice announced, echoing slightly in the enclosed space. "Find anything up there?" the first voice called back from downstairs. "Negative," came the reply from the upper floor. "Keep looking. It's here somewhere, that box." I held my breath, suspended in the musty air, the silence amplifying the frantic thudding in my ears. The man in the study moved methodically, pulling open drawers, tapping on paneling. Each second stretched into an agonizing eternity. Discovery felt inevitable. What then? Just as the tension threatened to suffocate me, a triumphant shout erupted from upstairs. "Yo, think I got something." The man in the study hurried out, his footsteps receding down the hall. A shaky, involuntary sigh escaped my lips. Relief, however, was fleeting. I remained trapped, phoneless, utterly isolated. Waiting several taut minutes, straining to decipher any sound indicating their return, I finally risked movement. Assured of momentary solitude, I eased the dumbwaiter door open and slipped back into the study's gloom. The house seemed still, yet the menace lingered. I needed my phone. I needed rescue. Moving with the stealth of a wraith, I navigated back towards the kitchen. Reaching the threshold, another victorious cry echoed from above. "Got it! Behind a painting! Master bedroom!" Heavy footfalls descended the stairs with triumphant speed. I ducked behind the broad leaves of a decorative palm, heart pounding, praying they wouldn't enter the kitchen. My luck had run dry. The two men burst in, faces alight with avarice and adrenaline. "Let's crack this baby and bounce," the taller one declared, planting a small, heavy safe onto the central island. And then I saw it. My phone, perched precariously near the edge of the counter, exactly where I'd abandoned it. So tantalizingly close, yet separated by an impassable gulf of danger. If only I could reach it. While their attention fixated on the safe, its tumblers resisting their efforts, I began a glacial crawl forward. My fingers stretched, trembling, towards the smooth glass surface, my lifeline, millimeter by agonizing millimeter. Contact. My hand closed around the phone, a wave of near-hysterical relief washing over me. But as I started to withdraw, my elbow connected with a ceramic vase. It wobbled, suspended in a sickening moment of slow motion, before plummeting to the tiled floor with a shattering crash. Silence descended, thick and absolute, before exploding. The burglars spun, eyes wide, locking onto my crouching form. For a heartbeat, sheer astonishment held us all captive. Then the tableau shattered into chaos. I scrambled towards the back door, my fingers fumbling desperately with the latch as curses and enraged shouts erupted behind me. The lock yielded, and I burst into the cool embrace of the night, air searing my lungs. A backward glance confirmed my worst fears. They were giving chase, their heavy strides pounding across the lawn, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Instinctively, I veered towards the dense woods bordering the property, seeking refuge in the concealing darkness. Branches lashed at my face, the undergrowth tearing at my clothes as I plunged deeper. Behind me, the crashing sounds of pursuit grew louder, closer. My foot snagged on an unseen root, sending me sprawling, the impact driving the air from my body. As I gasped, struggling to rise, a hand clamped onto my arm, yanking me violently upright. I found myself face to face with the taller intruder, his eyes blazing with a volatile mixture of fury and fear. "Shouldn't be here," he snarled, his fist drawing back. Primal survival surged. My knee shot upwards, connecting sharply. He buckled with a guttural groan, momentarily incapacitated. I didn't hesitate. I ran. How long, how far, I couldn't say. Direction dissolved into a desperate need for escape, for sanctuary. Finally, bursting from the tree line, I stumbled onto a quiet residential street. Blessed lights glowed in welcoming windows. The distant, rising keen of sirens sliced through the night air. I collapsed onto the nearest patch of lawn, breath tearing through me in ragged gasps. A porch light flicked on. An elderly woman, swathed in a bathrobe, peered out, her expression etched with concern. "Good heavens, child, are you all right?" she called out, her voice quavering slightly. "Should I phone the police?" Unable to speak, I managed a frantic nod. As she vanished back inside, my gaze fell to the phone still clutched fiercely in my hand. Somehow, through the terror and the flight, I hadn't let go. Minutes later, flashing blue and red lights painted the tranquil street, followed swiftly by the reassuring presence of paramedics. Recounting the ordeal, tending to the scrapes and bruises that were beginning to make themselves known, the stark reality began to crystallize. A routine task warped into a night of profound terror, stumbling into a crime, hunted through darkness, escaping by sheer, frantic will. In the ensuing days, amidst police inquiries and the unsettling reverberations of the incident, a persistent vulnerability shadowed me. Each key turning in a lock felt weighted with potential menace, every unfamiliar face a flicker of threat. Yet, alongside the fear, a different awareness began to dawn, a quiet resilience. I had confronted a primal terror and emerged, battered but intact. That night, etched indelibly into memory, would not be my defining narrative. Now, when my hand closes around a key, a heightened awareness accompanies the familiar motion, a sensitivity to what might lie beyond the threshold. But there's a readiness too, an acknowledgement that sometimes the most harrowing circumstances unearth reserves of strength previously unknown.